That number is a violation of community character, and I had it painted over this morning. You will not be putting it back. That was Delia Vance, president of the Stonewall Crest Homeowners Association for 9 years running, standing at the foot of my driveway in a hot pink blazer and white sneakers, telling me she had erased the address off the front of the house my wife and I built with our own hands. The house sat on 4.5 acres at the high end of a ridge road in the dry hills east of town. And the number she painted over had been bolted to that stone face for 22 years. What Delia did not know, what she never once thought to check in all the months she spent sending me letters, was that I spent 31 years of my life as the county addressing coordinator, the man whose office assigns every street name and house number in this valley, and that the authority she thought she was performing was an authority I had actually held. So let me ask you something before I tell you the rest. If someone painted over your front door, then dared you to fix it, what would you have done? My name is Walt Brennan. I am 64 years old. For most of my working life, I sat in a small office on the second floor of the County Roads and Surveys building, a room with a steel map cabinet that took 2 men to move, and a window that looked out over the impound lot. My job was addressing. People hear that word and they think mailboxes. They think of the little brass numbers you buy at the hardware store. It is more than that. And the difference is the reason I am telling you this story instead of a different one. When a new road is cut into a hillside, somebody has to decide what it is called and how the houses along it are numbered. Not guessed at. Decided according to a grid, in order, odd on one side and even on the other. Spaced by distance, so that the third house from the corner is not number 19 on a road where the numbers should still be in the single digits. There is a reason for every rule of it, and the reason is always the same. The reason is that one night a man will be on his kitchen floor with his chest seizing up, and his wife will be on the phone with a dispatcher. And the only thing standing between that man and the ambulance is whether the number on the front of the house matches the number in the county's system. I have sat in meetings where we argued for an hour about whether a flag lot got its own number or shared its neighbor's. It sounds like nothing. It is not nothing. It is the difference between found and not found. I set the grid for half this county. I trained the clerks who came after me, and the woman who runs the addressing authority now started at the desk outside my door. I know how a road becomes a road in the eyes of the law. I know that a developer can paint any name he likes on a metal sign and bolt it to a post at the bottom of a hill. And that name means exactly nothing until it is filed, served on the neighbors, and confirmed in a public record. I know the difference between a name on a sign and a name in the record. And that difference is the whole of this story. So hold on to it. Delia Vance never learned it. She had 8 years to learn it, and she never once drove the 4 miles to the recorder's office to look. My wife was named Carol. She drew the floor plan of our house on the back of a feed store receipt the first spring we owned the land, sitting on the open tailgate with the wind trying to take the paper. She put the kitchen on the east side so the morning light would come in over the sink. And she was right about that, the way she was right about most things. We spent 4 years building it on weekends, the 2 of us and whatever friends we could feed a pot of chili and a case of beer. I poured the footings. She framed alongside me, faster than I was, her hammer going in a steady rhythm I could find with my eyes closed. We hung the front door on our 7th anniversary. She passed 3 years ago, in the spring, with the kitchen light coming in over the sink the way she had planned. Our daughter Nora lives with me now. She is 16, sharp as a tack, the kind of kid who reads a contract before she signs a permission slip and asks the teacher what happens to the data on the field trip form. She has her mother's steadiness and her mother's hands. She is the one who first noticed the letters were not stopping, the way you notice a drip in the next room before you see the stain. She is the one who told me to start the folder, and she is the one who, the night this all began in earnest, sat across the kitchen table from me and asked the question every kid asks when they watch a parent get pushed. I want her name in your mind early, because she matters at the end, and because the whole reason a man keeps a clean record instead of losing his temper is sitting right there at the table watching to see which one he chooses. The address on our house was 4 Ridgeline Cut. I assigned that number myself, years before I ever dreamed of living there, back when the road was first dedicated and platted, and I was a young man with a steel ruler and a county manual. Carol used to laugh that I had addressed my own future home and not known it, that somewhere in a filing cabinet downtown there had been a number waiting for us the whole time. The brass numeral was 9 inches tall. I had bolted it to the stone face beside the front door with my own drill, 2 anchors, because a painted number fades in 10 years and a bolted number does not. That number had guided propane trucks up the grade, brought the volunteer fire crew to a brush fire on the back acre one dry September, and turned around one very lost census worker who had driven 40 minutes the wrong way. It was not decoration. It was the thing that told the world where we were. Stonewall Crest came later. About 8 years ago, a development company bought the flat land below the ridge and threw up 40 houses on quarter-acre lots, ringed them with a stucco wall, and formed a homeowners association. The man behind that company was Kurt Vance, and the president of the association was his wife, Delia. My property was older than their wall, older than their covenants, older than their entire idea of themselves. My deed predated their plat by 16 years. Even so, Stonewall Crest had ambitions. Their wall kept creeping up the ridge road, and so did Delia. It started small the way these things do, with a letter. The first one came on a Tuesday in the spring, on heavy cream paper with a gold embossed crest at the top, the kind of paper that costs money and is meant to. It informed me that my mailbox post was the wrong color and must be repainted to community standard within 14 days or a fine would be assessed. I read it twice at the kitchen counter. I did not live in their community. My land had never been annexed into their association, never signed into their covenants, never been part of their plat. The 14-day clock at the bottom was the part that told me what kind of people I was dealing with, because it assumed I would jump. I drove down to their little clubhouse to tell Delia this in person, politely, the way Carol would have wanted. Because Carol always said you give a person the chance to be reasonable before you decide they are not. The clubhouse was a low stucco building with a fountain out front that did not run. Delia was behind a folding table with a laminated map of the development spread in front of her, a coffee at her elbow in a mug that said, Board President. And she had drawn my parcel into the map in red marker, a neat rectangle at the top of the road, with a little flag of ink on it, like a summit she meant to claim. Mr. Brennan, she said, not looking up from the map. Your property sits at the top of our road, which makes it functionally part of our jurisdiction. The board has determined that uniform standards apply to the whole corridor. I told her, plainly, that the road was a county road, dedicated and maintained by the county, and that her wall stopped 200 feet short of my gate. I told her my address had been assigned and recorded before her husband owned a shovel in this valley. She finally looked up, and she smiled the way you smile at a child who has not yet learned the rules of a game the adults are playing, patient and a little pleased with herself. The board will be the judge of what is in the corridor, she said. We have standards here, Mr. Brennan. People who buy into Stonewall Crest expect them to be enforced, uniformly. I said the word corridor was doing a great deal of work in that sentence, and I left. I went home and started a folder. Manila, labeled in pencil, one word, Vance. I clipped the first letter inside and wrote the date and what was said across the top in the small block print I used for 31 years of field notes. That folder is the spine of everything that came after, and by the end it weighed more than a county phone book and would not close flat. That was incident 1. Nora watched me do it at the kitchen table, watched me date the letter and slide it into the folder, and she asked if it was really going to get worse. I told her that people who do not check their facts rarely stop at one wrong guess, that a person who is sure she is right and has never looked is the most dangerous kind in a paperwork fight, because she will keep going until she walks off a cliff she does not know is there. I was righter than I wanted to be. The second letter came 3 weeks later, and this one carried a fine, $200 for the mailbox post, plus a new complaint that my front gate was, in their words, an unapproved structure visible from the community. I read that line standing in the driveway, and I laughed once, short, because Carol and I had built that gate together one 4th of July weekend. A simple welded pipe frame with a cattle guard set into the gravel, and it had stood there longer than Delia had lived in the state. Visible from the community. The community was a wall and 40 roofs a quarter-mile downhill that you could only see my gate from if you stood on a ladder and wanted to. I filed the letter. I did not pay the fine, because you cannot be fined by a club you never joined. And a fine you pay once is a fine you have agreed to forever. Then I did the thing my whole career had trained me to do. I drove to the county recorder, which used to be 2 doors down from my old office, and I pulled the plat for ridgeline cut and the dedication record for the road, the actual instrument with the actual date. And I sat at the public terminal and read every line of it the way I had read 10,000 others. The road was dedicated to the county in 1971. My deed was recorded 16 years before the Stonewall Crest plat ever existed. The association had no recorded interest in any of it. I made 3 copies. One for the folder, one for a fireproof box in the barn, one for a friend across town. Carol always said, keep a copy where the fire cannot reach it. And she said it because her own father had lost every paper he owned in a house fire and spent the rest of his life proving things he should not have had to prove. I have kept that habit because she was right about that too. By midsummer, the letters were coming every other week, and they had stopped pretending to be about any one thing. A fine for my woodpile, stacked where it had been stacked for 20 years. A fine for a flatbed trailer parked on my own gravel where I park it every haying season. A fine for the color of my barn, which is barn red, which is the color barns have been since before there was a county here to address. Each one I dated in the corner, logged in the legal pad I kept beside the folder, and slid into the manila with the others. Each one I did not pay. I started a second sheet on the legal pad, a running count down the left margin, because Reyes had told me a tally is worth more than a story, and I believed him. The tally by the end of that first summer was 6 notices and $1,100 in fines I owed to no one on God's earth. I want you to hear that number and keep it, because it is going to be set against another number later. And the gap between the two is the entire point of this thing. Around then, I learned the thing that changed how I saw all of it. And I learned it the way you learn most true things. By accident, standing in line. I was at the feed store buying fence staples and ran into Hank Dorsey, a rancher who had sold his back 40 to the development 8 years before and regretted it every single day since. Hank is a big, slow man who chooses his words like he is paying cash for each one. He looked at the staples in my hand and he said, "They still after you up there, Walt?" I said they were. He leaned on the counter and lowered his voice the way men do when they are about to tell you something they have been carrying. He told me Kurt Vance was not done building. The flat land below the wall was full, every lot sold. And a development that stops growing is a development that starts losing money. Kurt wanted the ridge, He wanted the high ground with the long view, where the premium lots are, the ones that sell for double. And the only way Stonewall Crest could climb that hill was straight up the road past my gate. My 4.5 acres sat square in the middle of the path. Hank said, "You understand what the letters are now, do you not?" And I did. The fines were never about my mailbox or my woodpile or the color of my barn. The fines were a tool, and the tool had one job, which was to make me tired enough, or poor enough, or scared enough to sell and get out of the way. Delia was the noise. Kurt was the reason. I bought my staples, and I drove home slow that day, the long way, past the survey monument at the section corner I had set a brass cap on 30 years before. Thinking about Carol drawing our house on the back of a receipt, with the wind pulling at the paper. The fall brought the inspector. A man in a pressed polo shirt, khakis, and white sneakers stepped out of a clean SUV one Thursday morning, walked up to my gate with a clipboard and a laminated badge clipped to his collar, and announced he was there to perform a compliance walk-through of my property. The badge said, "Code Compliance, Stonewall Crest," in gold letters, with a little crest stamped beside the words. It was a nice badge. It had been ordered off the internet. I came down to the gate with my coffee, and I asked him one question. I asked to see his county credential, the card the county issues to a person with authority to inspect a parcel. He blinked at me. He did not have one, because there is no such thing. No private code compliance officer anywhere in this state with authority over a county-addressed parcel he does not live next to. I told him, level, that he was standing on a county road, that my gate was the end of his world, and that the only walk-through happening this morning was him walking back to his vehicle. He took photographs of my house anyway, holding the clipboard up over the top rail of the gate to get the camera high, and he taped a yellow tag to my gate post before he left. I peeled the tag off the second his SUV was around the bend, dated the back of it, and filed it. Incident 9. Up in the window over the porch, Nora had been photographing the whole thing. The man, the badge, the SUV, the plate, the way she had started doing without my asking. 2 copies of every frame, one to the cloud and one to a drive in the fireproof box. She is her mother's daughter. When I came back inside, she had already named the file folder on the drive and dated it. I called the sheriff's office about the man with the fake badge, not to start anything, only to put it on a record that was not mine. A deputy named Reyes came out that afternoon. Young, careful, the kind who takes notes in a real notebook with a pen instead of a phone. He stood at my gate and looked at the yellow tag and the photographs Nora had pulled up on the laptop. And he told me something I already knew but needed to hear from a man in a uniform. He said a complaint filed is a complaint he has to look into, even a foolish one, even one he can tell is foolish before he finishes reading it. Because that is how the job works, and the day he starts deciding which complaints are real is the day he becomes the problem. He said the association had been calling the office about me for months. My woodpile, my trailer, my gate, a steady drip of nothing. Then he said the part that mattered. He said, "The way you win this, Mr. Brennan, is not by shouting back. You win it by building a record so clean and so complete that the day it lands in front of someone who can act, the facts do all the talking and nobody has to take your word for anything." He told me he had watched the association push 2 smaller landowners off their parcels in the years he'd been out here. Good people who got tired and signed because fighting felt like drowning. He did not want to watch a third. Build the pattern, he said. Document every contact, every date, every name. And when you have enough, bring it to someone who can act on it. I asked him how I would know when it was enough. He looked up the road toward the wall for a moment and he said, "You will know it when the other side does something they cannot take back." I wrote that down word for word, and I filed his card in the folder. and I thought about it every day after. Winter was quiet, which worried me more than the letters had. Because in my experience, quiet from a person like Delia is not surrender. It is reloading. Then in the spring, she opened a new front. And this one was cleverer than fines. She started calling the companies that served my road. The propane company, the well service, the gravel outfit, anyone whose truck climbed past the wall. And she told them the same thing. That my property was under active association dispute, and that they entered the corridor at their own legal risk. Gil had filled my propane tank for 15 years. He is a steady, decent man who calls before he comes and always has a dog biscuit in his pocket for whatever dog meets him at the gate. He called me one evening, embarrassed, his voice careful, and he said, "Walt, the office got a letter about your place. Some association thing, legal language, and they have got me on hold until it is cleared. I am sorry. I do not like it either." That was Incident 16, and it was the first one that cost me something I could feel in my body. Because for 9 days in the cold end of winter, I had no propane. And Nora and I ran the wood stove in the front room and slept out there under quilts with the dog between us, while the company's lawyers read Delia's nonsense and concluded, as anyone would, that it was nonsense. 9 days. I logged every phone call, every hold, every name. I logged the 9 cold days in the margin of the legal pad. Then I drove down to the clubhouse one more time, because Carol always said you give a person 3 chances to do right before you stop offering them. And by my count, this was the 3rd. Delia was at her folding table again, and this time there were 2 board members beside her, and she did not let me finish my first sentence. "You are interfering with the orderly development of this community," she said, hood enough for the others to hear. "And frankly, your little holdout up there is an eyesore and a liability. People like you always think the rules do not apply. They apply. This corridor is functionally ours, and you are going to learn that." I told her, level, that I had asked her once to check the record, and that I would not ask again. I left the 3rd copy of the plat on her table. She did not look at it. That was the last time I tried to fix it with words. The summer that followed was the staircase at its steepest, the steps coming faster and higher. The fines crossed $3,000 on paper I kept but did not honor. Then a lawyer's letter arrived, on real firm letterhead this time, threatening to file a lien against my property for the unpaid association assessments. A lien they had no standing to file, since you cannot lien a man over dues to a club he never joined. But a lien is a frightening word, and the letter was written to frighten. Most people getting that letter would have called to settle. I sat down at the kitchen table, and I sent that lawyer a copy of the recorded dedication and a 1-line note in my field block print. "My parcel is not within your client's association. Please verify the record before you file anything." I never heard from him again, not one more word, because a real lawyer checks the record before he stakes his names to a filing. And the moment he checked, he understood his client had handed him a loaded gun pointed at her own foot. Then the survey stakes appeared, and that was the morning I understood Kurt had stopped waiting for me to crack. I walked my fence line on a hot, still morning in July, the way I do, and I found a row of pink survey flags marching across the northwest corner of my land. Neat, evenly spaced, professional, and a fresh line of orange spray paint laid across my own gateposts, marking what somebody had decided would be a new boundary. They had sent a survey crew onto my land without permission and shot a line for the wall's future path right across my corner, the exact corner where my brass section monument sat in the ground, the monument I had set myself decades before. I stood there a long minute. Then I went and got my camera and Nora's, and we photographed every flag against the fence, against the sky, with the monument in frame for scale. 41 flags. I pulled each one out of the ground by hand, bagged them, dated the bag, and set it on the workbench in the barn beside the others. Incident 29. That night, Nora asked me if they were allowed to do that. Walk onto our land and paint on our gate. And I told her no, they were not. And that this was the kind of thing Reyes meant when he said the other side would eventually do something they could not take back. I was wrong about which thing it would be. The thing was still a month away. And then came the morning that gives this story its name. It was a Monday in August, early, the lights still gold and low across the ridge. I came out with my coffee to find Delia and a man with a roller and a bucket standing at my gate. And the brass number, my 9-inch brass 4 bolted to the stone by my own hand, was gone under a smear of gray exterior paint. They had painted over the front of my house, not a sign, not a mailbox, the actual address of the actual home where my daughter sleeps, the number that tells the fire truck where to stop. Delia stood there in the hot pink blazer with her arms crossed and told me what you heard at the start, that the number was a violation of community character and that I would not be putting it back. The man with the roller would not meet my eyes. I did not shout. I want you to understand that, because everything depends on it. I set my coffee down on the gatepost, and I felt my jaw go tight and my heart go hard and slow. And I looked at the gray smear where my wife and I had bolted that number 22 years before, and I said only one thing. I said, "You have just made my house impossible for an ambulance to find, and I am going to fix that the right way." Then I went inside and called the sheriff, and I called the county, and I opened the folder to a fresh page. Here is what Delia had done without knowing it. By obscuring a posted address on a county road, she had not violated a community standard. She had created a public safety hazard on a county address parcel. And county addressing is not a matter of opinion or community character. It is governed by an ordinance. The ordinance I helped write. The body that enforces that ordinance is the County Addressing Authority, a small board that meets in the roads building, and the people on that board had worked under me for years. I did not need to sue Delia. I did not need to shout at her across a folding table. I needed to do the one thing I had done 10,000 times in my career. I needed to file a petition. I did not, however, file the petition I knew she expected, a complaint to restore my number. I filed something larger, because the record gave me the standing to, and because the road itself was the real battlefield. The road Delia kept calling functionally hers had been dedicated to the county under a name from the original plat, a name almost nobody used because the developer's marketing had slapped Stonewall Crest Boulevard on a fake sign at the bottom. The real, recorded name of that corridor, the name in the dedication instrument signed in 1971, was a name the developer had quietly petitioned to change 2 years earlier, to make their marketing official. And that petition was still pending, unresolved, sitting in a file because nobody had pushed it through. A pending petition can be challenged, and the ordinance gives any addressed property owner on a road standing to petition for the official name of that road. So I renamed the street. I will tell you how, because the how is the lesson. I went to the recorder and pulled the original dedication, the plat, and the developer's pending name change petition. I pulled my own deed showing my address predated their plat by 16 years. I pulled the ordinance and the section that says obscuring a posted address is a violation carrying a daily penalty. I filled out the road naming petition the way I had taught 2 generations of clerks to fill it out. Clean, complete, every box, every attachment. and I proposed the name Carol had earned, the name that honored the family who had lived on that ridge longest. I filed it on a Wednesday. The county clerk who took it had started her career filing my paperwork, and she read the top sheet, looked up at me, and said quietly, "Walt, this is airtight." I asked her to set it for the next public hearing of the addressing authority and to send notice to all interested parties, which by law included Stonewall Crest. Then I went home and waited, and I kept logging, because the letters did not stop just because I had filed. The hearing was held on a Tuesday evening in the Rhodes Building, in the same second-floor room where I had spent 31 years. The addressing authority sat at the front, 3 members and a clerk. Deputy Reyes stood at the back, because the obscured address complaint had become his case. Hank Dorsey came, and Gil the propane man came, and a dozen Ridge neighbors came, and Delia came in a fresh blazer with the association's lawyer and Kurt Vance beside her. And the developer wore the smile of a man who had never once been told no by a government office. Nora sat in the front row with the folder on her lap. Delia spoke first, because she always did. She told the board that the corridor was, in her words, functionally part of the Stonewall Crest community, that the existing signage already reflected that, and that any renaming should conform to the development's established identity. She said my petition was the act of a bitter old man trying to disrupt orderly growth. She was performing for a room she assumed was hers. It was the 3rd time I had heard her say functionally, and it was the last. The chair of the authority, a woman named Pratt, who had been my deputy for 11 years, asked Delia a single question. She asked whether the association held any recorded interest in the road. Delia said the community maintained the corridor's character. Pratt asked again, recorded interest, yes or no? The lawyer leaned in and answered for her. No recorded interest. Then Pratt turned to me and asked me to present. And I laid it out the way the record demanded, with no heat in my voice at all. I walked to the table at the front, and I laid the record down one piece at a time, in order, the way I had taught clerks to build a file so that anyone reading it would arrive at the only possible conclusion on their own. I put the dedication instrument down first, signed and recorded in 1971, naming the road, the original ink. I set my deed beside it, recorded 16 years before the Stonewall Crest plat existed. I set the developer's own pending name change petition beside that, the one Kurt had filed 2 years before and let rot because nobody made him finish it. And I noted that it had never been served on the adjacent owners the way the ordinance plainly requires, which made it defective on its face. I set the ordinance section down beside that, the one on obscuring a posted address, the daily penalty printed right there in the language I had helped write a long time ago. And last, I set down a single photograph, the one Nora had taken on that gold August morning, the gray smear of paint over the place on the stone where the brass 4 had been for 22 years. I did not say one word about Delia Vance. I did not raise my voice, and I did not look at her. I said that the address on a county road had been deliberately obscured, that obscuring it created a safety hazard governed by county ordinance and not by anybody's opinion of community character, and that, as the owner of the oldest, lawfully addressed parcel on the corridor, I was petitioning the authority to confirm the road's official recorded name and to restore lawful addressing along its length. That was all. Then I stood back from the table and let the papers sit there in the light and do the work I had spent a year in a folder assembling it to do. The room was quiet. Pratt read the dedication date out loud. 1971. She read the date my deed was recorded. She read the date of the developer's pending petition and noted it had never been served on adjacent owners as the ordinance required. which alone made it defective. She looked at the photograph of the painted-over number for a long moment. Then she looked at Delia and Kurt, and she said, in the flat, administrative voice I had taught her, that the association held no recorded interest in the road, that obscuring a posted address was a violation carrying a daily penalty from the date of the act, and that the developer's pending name change was dismissed as improperly served. She granted my petition. The road on the ridge would carry the name in the original dedication, confirmed and posted, and my address would be restored at association expense under penalty. Nobody cheered. That is not how these rooms work. There was just the small sound of a stamp coming down on the top sheet of my petition, and the sound of Delia Vance saying nothing at all for the first time since I had met her. Here are the two numbers I promised you. On my side of the ledger, 22 years of a lawfully posted address, 0 fines ever owed, and one document recorded in 1971 that ended the argument in a single motion. On their side, a daily penalty that had been accruing from the August morning they painted over my number, which by the night of that hearing stood at 112 days, and a developer's pending petition dismissed as defective. The road they wanted to absorb became the channel that exposed them. It got worse for them after that, the natural way, not by my hand. The dismissed petition and the obscured address violation drew the county's attention to the rest of the corridor, and an audit found that the developer's pending climb up the ridge had been platted across the dedicated road's right-of-way without proper approval. The wall they had been creeping uphill stopped that autumn and never moved again. Kurt's premium ridge lots, the ones my 4.5 acres sat in the middle of, could not be platted at all without the road, and the road was no longer theirs to rename or claim. Delia stepped down from the board presidency before the next election, not in disgrace exactly, but in the quiet way authority leaves a person when the thing it rested on turns out never to have been there. Deputy Reyes closed his file with the violation on record. Hank Dorsey bought me a coffee and did not say I told you so, because neither of us is the type. The county posted the new street sign on a clear morning in October. Nora and I drove down to watch them set it, and the name on it was the one from the original dedication, the name that had always been the road's real name in the record, the one the developer's sign had papered over the same way Delia had papered over my number. Some things are true whether or not somebody paints over them. Then I drove home and took the gray paint off my stone face with a heat gun and a putty knife. Slow, careful, the way Carol did everything. And I bolted the brass 4 back where it had always been. Nora held the drill bag and handed me the bit without being asked, the way she has handed me things her whole life. And when the number was up, she stepped back and looked at it and said, "There it is, Dad." That was all. There it is. That is the family part, and it is the part that matters most to me. So I will not stretch it. My daughter is safe. The ambulance can find our door. The house her mother drew on the back of a feed store receipt still stands at the top of the ridge with the right number on it. And the road below it carries a name older than the wall that tried to swallow it. Carol would have filed every letter the same way I did. She is the one who taught me to keep a copy where the fire cannot reach. So here is the lesson. Plain, the way I would tell it to you across my own gate. Authority that cannot show you the record is not authority. It is performance. When somebody in a blazer tells you that your land is functionally theirs, ask them for the recorded interest, the dedication, the plat, the deed, and watch what happens to their voice when they cannot produce it. Pull your own deed and read it. Walk your boundary and know where it truly lies. Find out who really holds the road in front of your house, the county, or the developer, because the answer is written down somewhere and most people never look. Keep a folder. Date everything. Make 2 copies and put one where the fire cannot reach. You do not win these fights by shouting louder than the clipboard. You win them by being the one person in the room who brought the paper. If you have ever had a letter on cream-colored paper tell you that your own home is a violation, I want to hear about it. Tell me your story in the comments, because somebody else reading needs to know they are not the only one. Subscribe if you want to stay for the next one. And here is what is coming. A retired water rights examiner in a drought year. An HOA that decided the creek running through 3 generations of her family's ranch was a community amenity. And the 90-year-old decree that proved whose water it had always been. Bring your coffee. I will see you at the gate.